Hello, everyone. My name is Cait Flanders. I am the author of a new self-help memoir called The Year of Less, which is a book where I document my journey in not shopping for a year, which, well, that's what it started with, but it turned into so much more than that. I'm going to give a few minutes to just for people to join right now. But I wanted to say that I'm so excited to be here and so grateful to Psychologies magazine for letting me do this, for letting me pop in and say hi, share a bit about the book, and also help walk you guys through what I'm calling the month of less. So it's not quite as overwhelming as the year of less challenge, but just doing it for a month. So I'm going to just wait a couple more minutes, also maybe wait for the garbage truck to go away. But thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you for popping in this morning. I won't take up too much of your time. I think this could be anywhere from, well, we'll see, maybe like 15, 20, 30 minutes if you guys have questions at all. But I'm just really excited to be here. So I'd love to hear, if anyone wants to say hi, I'd love to hear where you are right now in the world. I will say I'm in British Columbia, Canada. I'm making my first trip to the UK on May 1st. And I'm so excited to come. I'll give it just another minute or two. So if you didn't hear just the first part of this, my name is Cait. I am the author of The Year of Less, and I'm very grateful to Psychologies magazine for letting me come and take over their account for a little while. Share a little bit about the book, and also help you walk you guys through what we're calling the month of less challenge. So it doesn't have to be quite as extreme as what I did. My challenge was to not shop for an entire year. And during that year, I also ended up getting rid of 70% of my belongings. And I will just say those numbers sound big and it sounds like a long period of time. And in some ways it was. It was also very successful for me in terms of what my initial goal was to what I ended up feeling towards the end. But if you read the book, it was about so much more than that, or it ended up being about so much more than that. But I will jump in with thoughts on this. So I will start by saying that when I started the challenge, my goal was quite simply to save more money, stop wasting it on stuff that I didn't really need, and just see what that could look like. I remember I wrote this quote that said something like, I want to become a more mindful consumer, and I didn't really know what that looked like, what that meant, but I learned as the journey went on. So I'll back it up just so you guys know a bit more about who I am. So I have been blogging about my personal finances since 2011. At that time, I was maxed out with nearly $30,000 of debt. Most of it was consumer debt. So unfortunately, it wasn't things like student loans. It was financing a car and maxing out my credit cards and consolidating my debt at one point into a loan and then maxing out my cards again. And I was basically just living a lifestyle that I couldn't afford. So basically from the time that I got my first credit card, I was using it like it was free money or like it was a second bank account. And I remember in the months leading up to being maxed out, so 2011, I remember every time I would go to swipe my credit card, I had this feeling inside of me that would say, like, you shouldn't do this. Like, you shouldn't be paying for these things. You shouldn't be adding more to your debt. Like, I knew that the worst was probably coming. I knew that I was getting myself into a bad financial situation, and I ignored it. And it felt awful, but I continued to ignore it and just carried on. And then eventually, of course, I ended up being maxed out. So I was 25 years old back then, and being maxed out, I didn't really have a choice but to start paying off my debt. So the first thing that I did, which now doesn't really make that much sense, but was I actually decided that I was going to start a blog to document getting out of debt. And the first 6 months of the blog were so boring. I used to just write these weekly spending reports where I would literally just say, like, on Monday, I spent X amount at Starbucks, and on Tuesday, I spent X amount at Starbucks, or on groceries, or gas for my car. And I didn't really write much more than that. But the job like the blog did its job in the sense that all I wanted to do was sort of have an accountability partner, and the blog was like my tool for that. It was my way of staying accountable to my goal, which was to pay off my debt. So I paid off my debt in 2013. It took exactly 2 years. And what I will say is, like, obviously I would never regret getting out of debt. What I do regret is that I was so aggressive in my approach that I really didn't learn any of the lessons around why I had been overspending for all of those years. So I didn't learn anything about what my habits were. I didn't realize that I was an emotional spender. I didn't know these things about myself. I was just so obsessed with getting down to zero. So it's not that surprising to me, and it is always in hindsight. We never know this stuff as it's happening, but it's not that surprising to me that once I was debt-free, I basically went right back to spending. So I didn't go back into debt, but I would do this thing where at the beginning of the month, I would say that I wanted to save 20% of my income. And then I would get to the end of every month and I would find myself justifying why it was okay that I had only saved about 5%, like maybe 10% was a good month for me, but I wasn't saving very much at all. And that also didn't feel good. It didn't feel good that I was justifying my spending. It didn't feel good that I wasn't reaching any of my financial goals. Like I would always think I would like to save more for retirement. I would like to travel more. I had all these thoughts of things I wanted to be doing, but I wasn't getting anywhere closer to them. So that is sort of where the idea for the shopping ban came from. I realized that I just wanted to be spending less, save a bit more, become a mindful consumer, again, which I didn't really know what that meant when I got started, but those were my thoughts. That is where it started from. And so I will share a bit about like how I came up with the rules and what that kind of looked like for me, but then I have 5 ideas for ways that you can start a month of less challenge of your own. So one of the first things I did, which seems a little bit counterintuitive, but I'll tell you why it was really helpful, is that at the same time of starting the shopping ban, I also decided to declutter my home and get rid of things that didn't, just that I didn't use, that didn't feel like they had a purpose. That, I mean, Marie Kondo now says, like, if it sparks joy, if it didn't have a place for me in my home, then I got rid of it. Again, throughout the year, that ended up being 70% of all of my belongings. And that sounds really extreme, but the reason that that was so helpful was because every time I got rid of things, I was able to realize how much I had spent over the years on stuff I had never even used. And that was just a really good, like, visual reminder for me that I don't want to ever get back to a place where I am overspending and also wasting money on things that I don't actually want, that I won't end up using, that will just collect dust in my home. So decluttering was really helpful for me for all of those reasons. The other thing that helped as I was decluttering was I decided to take inventory of the things I owned. Again, this sounds sort of extreme, but the reason I did it, partially just because I was curious about the numbers, like at the same time that I tracked how many things I got rid of, I also tracked how many things I kept. So it was more just like a numbers thing at first, but in taking inventory of the things that I owned, I was then able to stop myself from making a lot of impulse purchases. So throughout the year, whenever I thought of like buying a book, I could remember that when I started, I had 54 books I hadn't even read. And just having that kind of awareness is what helped me stop myself from making a lot of impulse purchases. And truly, like, not that buying things is bad. And I actually really want to make sure I say that, like, buying stuff isn't bad and spending money isn't bad. But it was really about getting to a place where I was only buying things when I need them, rather than like preemptively buying things thinking I'll use it one day. So that is where taking inventory helped. The next thing I did was wrote a list of rules. And actually I wrote 3 lists for myself. So the first list was the things I was not allowed to buy. And actually decluttering and taking inventory is what helped me make that list. Again, it's like seeing how much stuff I had wasted money on before, and then seeing how much money I had wasted on stuff, and then also seeing how much stuff I owned and was keeping, right? Knowing those 2 things helped me write the things I was not allowed to buy. So for me, it was things like clothes, shoes, accessories, books, magazines, things for around the house. And then I also added takeout coffee to my list. And I will say that, like as a financial writer, I'm not someone who would ever tell people to not get your takeout coffee. Also because I get takeout coffee today, but it is so much different than what it was like before. Before, I had such a habit with takeout coffee that I was probably getting it twice a day. And at that time, like when I started the shopping ban, I was working from home and still somehow spending about $100 a month on takeout coffee. And I just was no longer comfortable with that. Again, going back to the thought of, how can I be reaching other financial goals? So for me, just realizing takeout coffee, it had become too much of a habit and I wasn't even enjoying it that much. Like it was just this thing I did on autopilot and I didn't want to be spending money on it anymore. So those are the things I was not allowed to buy. Things I was allowed to buy, I would call them more like consumables. What first steps can we take to declutter in a productive way? Oh yeah. Well, I have some tips. Like I was just going to share a bit about my story and then I have 5 tips for everyone. So I will absolutely share that. So the things that I was allowed to buy, what I would call them consumables. So things like, obviously groceries, if you're eating, like, obviously I was allowed to buy groceries, put gas in my car, toiletries if you run out of them or if I ran out of them. So the things like, oh, I've been joking, like, but obviously if you run out of deodorant and toothpaste, everyone in your life wants you to be able to buy more of those things. So it was really just essentially the things you use on like a daily and weekly basis. Buying that stuff is okay. I also created a short list, again, knowing mine was a year long, of the things I was, I called it like an approved shopping list, but again, knowing it was for a full year, I could look ahead and see that there were some events in my life that I would need to buy a few things for. I also had things like, I was still allowed to buy gifts. I didn't want my shopping ban to affect anyone else in my life, so that was still okay. And then I could look at a couple things like, one of my goals too was that if I had saved enough money, I really wanted to be able to buy myself a new bed. My bed was 13 years old at that point. And again, like one of those things that because it's often an expensive purchase, I would just feel like I never had the money for it. And so I couldn't make it happen. But I was like, if I have the money, I want to make that happen. So aside from that, 2 of the things I think that helped me the most and that I would suggest for others always is unsubscribe. I unsubscribed from store newsletters. I will say back when I did this, so in 2014, I used a service that now I don't really recommend only because there's been a lot of information out there that they sell their data. So unfortunately, my answer at this point is like whenever you see one come in, just don't be afraid to hit the unsubscribe button. I know it takes a second, but it's also easier to hit unsubscribe than to continually like put it in the trash and then have it come in every week. So if you can hit unsubscribe the next time you see one, the reason that was so important is because it removed so many temptations for me. Again, like we don't think about it. We think when we sign up for store newsletters that yes, we want to know when the sales price comes up, but that's just the point. Like if you want to shop less, you shouldn't need to know about the sales. So unsubscribing from store newsletters was a lifesaver for me. And then obviously I was very accountable on my blog. I wrote about this every single month. As time went on, I started doing kind of an update every 2 months on how the shopping ban was going. But for anyone else, I would say it's really important to tell at least one person. So I think, and I write about this quite openly in the book, I think that in the past, I've had a lot of friends who I would say, I don't want to say like encourage you to make the bad decision, but I had a lot of friends, like if you really want to do something, like if I wanted to skip the gym, if I wanted to get a pizza instead of working out, if I wanted to go shopping, if I wanted to, just like not do what I should be doing or felt like I should be doing, I could call those friends. I could call the friends that were going to encourage me to skip the gym, go hang out, go out for dinner instead of doing the things that I knew were healthier and what I really wanted to be doing. But I think that something that's been really helpful for me is realizing I do have a couple of friends who will encourage me to make the good decision. And that is so important. So the friend will say, no, like go to the gym. Even if you're only there 20 minutes, that is what you want to do. And so in the case of the shopping ban, like find a friend or two who, it doesn't even really matter like if they enjoy shopping or not. It's just if they know your goal, if they are the friend who will like help you stick to your goal rather than easily talk you out of it. So those are probably the 5 things that set me up the most. So I'll describe them now in a way for you that if you wanted to take this on as a month of less rather than a year, because I know a year can seem like a long time, here is what I would say. When it comes to decluttering, I would say if you decluttered the spaces you spend the most time in, so for me, it would be, well, you can see this here. I'm like, my office is also my living room, is sort of also my kitchen. But for you, like if it was an office, if it was your living room, I think that the space that you spend the most time in is a great place to start because you can see the immediate effects. So you can feel it rather than tackling a room you don't spend a lot of time in. Of course, like there might still be troublesome areas in your home, but remember, this is just a challenge for a month. So you want to see the effects because seeing the effects and feeling them is what will help you keep going. So by decluttering the space you spend the most time in, I also want to say that you could literally just declutter things like the tabletop, the drawers, even just like the cupboard or closet. Like if the entire space feels too overwhelming, like start with one thing. My friend Jay always says like do one drawer at a time. And even though that's not the way I decluttered, I absolutely know that it does have a long-lasting effect. Like as long as you can tackle one small thing first, it can be extremely helpful. So that would be probably my most, because I'm so glad Psychologies asked about the in a productive way. What I want to add to that is that once you've decluttered, once you've identified all the things that you do want to remove from your home, remove them as soon as possible. So Nicola said she started with her DVD collection. So the thing that helped me with decluttering was removing it right away. So basically, as soon as things were bagged up or put in boxes, I immediately took them down to my car. And then once I had enough stuff, I then went to a donation center. The problem is that decluttering gets even more overwhelming when you've sort of half done it, but then leave it by the door or leave it in a closet and think I'll deal with it later. You have to actually remove it. You have to remove it and get it out of your home. And that is when you start to feel the effects of it. So that is some thoughts on decluttering. At the same time that you're doing it, I would really suggest taking inventory, but you do not have to take inventory of absolutely everything like I did. I will also say, if you've read the book or you read the book, people have been asking me if I keep an inventory of the things in my home, and the answer is no. It was truly just a one-time thing I did at the beginning of the challenge, but it's still to this day, it's been 3.5 years since I started that, almost 4 years since I started that challenge. That single act, that one time I took inventory, has still been so helpful to me. So I would say taking inventory just of the things you own the most of will be really helpful. And what this can look like is, let's say you were walking around your home, again, while you're decluttering even, but walking around your home and adding up or just kind of figuring out what the 5 things you own the most of in each room are. So in your bedroom, because of your closet and your wardrobe, it would probably be things like shirts and pants and socks, underwear, tank tops, whatever. But literally just writing that down, I know it doesn't sound very exciting, but write it down and then write the number of how many you have. And it's so important because, again, you don't have to keep it with you. It doesn't have to be in your wallet. Although, again, if that's helpful, do that. Keep it with you. But you don't have to. I find that just visually, I'm a visual learner, writing it down one time, it can stop you from making a lot of impulse purchases. Then I would say, for doing it for a month, you should still write some rules of the things you're allowed to buy and not allowed to buy. So there's just 2 lists. Part of me thinks it doesn't need to be overly complicated. I think, again, it actually really helps. Walking around your home, looking at things, you can see the things that you use most often and potentially use up most often. So write down those things, put them, if you have a bunch of stuff and you know you're not going to need more for the month, you're not allowed to buy it, add it to that list. But if you can see that you're almost out of deodorant or toothpaste, if you can see that you're almost out, put it on the list of things you're allowed to buy. I think we don't have to overcomplicate it. The minute we overcomplicate it, that is when it just becomes really overwhelming and we feel like we either want to give up or, I don't know, just like gives us more reasons to quit or give in. And when it feels too constricted and too restrained, that's when, or at least for me, that's almost when I rebel from it. So even though I know the year, it sounded overwhelming or it sounded like a really hard challenge, there were parts of it that were actually really easy. Like writing that list of rules was actually pretty easy for me. I can't say it was easy to stick to like every day, but writing the rules was easy. I'm just gonna read this question. How would you suggest that you never thought you would like? Okay, so the thought on reducing costs, the thing I would say about that is sort of two parts. Like one is that personal finance is very personal. So I think that it's wrong of me to say something like, you know, you can immediately cut out this one expense from your life because that's going to look so different for everyone. So what I would say actually to get started, and honestly, this is sort of like advice as a whole. Something I've realized is that a lot of the changes I've made, so whether it's getting out of debt, doing this challenge, have come from me tracking my spending. And really, like beyond just tracking my spending, so finally seeing where my numbers were going, is asking myself like every few days, every week, like, am I happy with where the money was going? So again, this is why it's very personal. Like personal finance is personal. That is going to look different for everyone. So what I would say with that question is if you started tracking your spending, you would be able to see where you could cut back. And so that's why like I can't say very specifically which things you should do. I think that that is so different for everyone, but I think that tracking your spending is a great place to start, actually seeing where the numbers are going. It's also really helpful because, I mean, I know that some people already do it, but I think in general, I find a lot of times when I'm talking about money with people, we all think we're doing pretty okay. Like you think you're fine or you think you know how much you're spending on something. And then when you track your spending for, again, even a month, like if you did it for the month, maybe that's one of the rules too. Like one of the suggestions is that you actually get a really clear picture of where your money is going. For some people, it's for the first time. I will go through periods now where I don't track my spending as often because I have found for me personally where I'm at, I'm pretty much spending the same amount like every month. But then even just for 1 month, once in a while, I'll start tracking it again and just see like, oh, you know what, maybe I am spending a little too much on restaurants or on groceries even. Like groceries, I know it's a little bit different everywhere, all over the world, but groceries are something that in Canada, I feel like at least where I live, the costs have inflated so much. That maybe in some ways it's not realistic for me to be buying all the same things that I used to, just because it's so much more expensive now. So I would say start by tracking your spending. The other part of that too is that, and it's not like exactly in the question, but I would say that with things like this, so the thought of like reducing costs or just staying on track when you're working towards something, is that even though maybe unexpected costs come up or in instances like the shopping ban, like there were moments where I did want to give up. There was one moment that I write about in the book where I did give up on it. And the thing we have to stop doing is when that happens, like when the unexpected cost comes, we need to not stress so much in that moment about like, oh, like now I've failed and everything, like I should just give up, like why am I bothering? That is stuff I used to say to myself all the time. If an unexpected cost comes up, you just have to carry on with what you're doing. Like you might have to change where the amounts are going. The amounts that you were saving might have to go towards these other things. But at the end of the day, you still have the same amount of money coming in. So on your next payday, just do stuff with it. You just have to maybe change the goals, change the timelines, but you have to just start allocating it towards the different costs. And it doesn't mean that you're a failure. Life happens and things happen. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just maybe it's time to start allocating it towards different stuff, and that's just part of the path. So back to the rules, I would say that after you've written yours, or I did say this, like unsubscribing from store newsletters. And like I said, I would not suggest the one that I was using before, only because I have heard that they were selling people's data, so selling off your email, which is just wild to think about. Like their whole thing was to sort of help you clear out your inbox and then they would sell your email address. But anyways, so I won't suggest that one. But every time an email comes through from a store, a retailer, a brand that you like, it's okay to hit unsubscribe. I used to feel this weird guilt almost, like there were stores that I sort of felt this weird loyalty to, or like I genuinely do like buying stuff for them. So I almost felt like it was weird or disloyal of me to unfollow the account. But that's not true. Like it's just a social media account, or it's just an email list. And when you need to buy those things or things from them, know that you will visit the website, but you don't need to find out every time they have stuff on sale. The other part I would add to that is really just creating some awareness around the fact that sales are cyclical. So we see sales prices and think that we might never see them again, but more often than not, you'll see it again between 30 to 90 days. And the average is actually about 44, I think. So they will come around again typically. You don't need to stay informed. Sales prices will come again. And then my last point would be to tell at least one person. So for me, obviously I was accountable on the blog, but I also talked to my best friend Emma about it all of the time. And I would send Emma text messages telling her things like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking of buying new bedding, like talk me out of it. And she would just kind of like laugh at me and be like, you do not need new bedding. Everything is fine. Like just stay on track. You're doing great. And it was also okay that she laughed at me, because some of the things that I was texting her were very silly. Like there were definitely things I did not buy. So it helps to have a friend too who you feel comfortable like being yourself with, laughing about like maybe the challenges that you're facing. And because I will say, like, even if it's only a month, there will probably be at least one challenge that comes up, whether it is realizing that you have a habit around spending that you weren't quite aware of, or maybe you're an emotional spender. It's that undoubtedly within a 1 month period of time, probably at least one thing will come up that will shock you and be a bit of a challenge. So I think it's really, really helpful to have at least one person to talk to about that. So I will leave it there. That's kind of 5 steps to getting started with your own month of less challenge. And I do have lots more to say, but I also know that I'm going to be back on March 29th, so in 10 days. And I will share a few more tips, some ideas, and then also talk a lot more about kind of the mindset shifts that you have to make when doing a challenge like this, and some of the lessons that I learned that I would love to pass on and help make sure that you are successful in your own month of less. So thank you so much for watching, and I will leave you guys there.